The briefing room smelled like old coffee and new authority. Major Daniel Harwick had been in command of the 3rd Special Operations Support Battalion for 11 days. He had spent most of those 11 days doing what new commanders do: learning names, reading files, establishing presence. He was 38 years old, had 2 combat deployments, a master's degree from the Army War College, and the particular brand of confidence that comes from having been told consistently since the age of 19 that he was exactly the kind of officer the Army needed more of. He stood at the front of the briefing room on Forward Operating Base Mercer, southeastern Afghanistan, and looked at the 12 people filtering through the door: intelligence analysts, senior NCOs, a liaison from ISOC. 2 people he didn't recognize yet. One of them was a woman. She came in 3rd from the end, no rank visible on her plain tan uniform, kit bag over one shoulder, a battered notebook in her left hand. She was tall, muscular in the way that comes from actual physical work rather than gym vanity, and she moved through the room with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been in many rooms like this one and had never once been impressed by any of them. She found a seat near the back, set her notebook on the table, and looked at nothing in particular while she waited. Harwick noticed her the way commanders notice things they haven't been briefed on yet, with the mild irritation of something unexpected. He had asked Ellison 3 days ago to brief him on every person attached to the battalion. Ellison had done it. This woman had not been on the list. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her clearance level. He didn't know what she was doing in his briefing room. He knew 11 people in this room. She was the 12th. He decided to address it directly. "Before we start," he said, and the room went quiet with the practiced speed of people who know what a commander's "before we start" means. "I want to make sure everyone in this room is supposed to be in this room." A few faces, a few nods. The woman in the back didn't react. She had opened her notebook and was writing something, which meant she had either not heard him or was choosing not to respond to a statement that hadn't technically been addressed to her. "Can I ask your name and function?" he said, looking directly at her. She looked up from her notebook. Her eyes were calm and direct and gave nothing away. "Captain Lena Carver," she said. "I'm here for the pattern analysis segment." Harwick held her gaze for a moment. Pattern analysis. He hadn't seen that on the agenda. He hadn't authorized a captain to attend this briefing. He looked at his S2, Master Sergeant Ellison, who gave a slight shrug that meant he didn't know either. That shrug bothered Harwick more than the woman herself, because Ellison knew everything about his command. That was Ellison's function. A thing Ellison didn't know was a thing that had come in around the normal channels. "This briefing is for senior personnel," Harwick said, not unkindly, just clearly. "There are seats in the annex room with the secondary feed. Why don't you—" "I'm fine here," she said. The room went very still. Not because she had said it loudly. She hadn't. She had said it the way someone says a fact, quietly, without inflection, without challenge, without apology. She had said it, and then she had looked back at her notebook, as if the conversation had reached its natural conclusion, as if Harwick's authority to direct where people sat in his own briefing room was a minor administrative matter that had been addressed to everyone's satisfaction. Harwick felt something shift in the room that he couldn't immediately name. It was the shift that happens when someone pushes back on authority without actually pushing. When they simply decline to comply in a register so quiet that responding to it feels somehow disproportionate. He decided to let it go, for now. He would address it after the briefing. There was work to do, and he was not going to spend the first 10 minutes of his command's primary intel session in a standoff about seating arrangements with a captain he'd never met. The intelligence officer, Lieutenant Marsh, began the briefing with the standard overview. Enemy movement in the Corangale corridor. 3 suspected HVT locations. Signal intercepts from the previous 72 hours. Pattern of life data on 2 compounds in the Peak River Valley. It was a solid briefing. Marsh was competent, thorough, organized. He had been running intelligence briefings for this battalion for 8 months before Harwick arrived, and he ran them well. Clean slides, clear language, good sequencing of information from context to detail. He laid out the data without editorializing and moved through his materials without fumbling. Harwick listened, took notes, asked 2 questions, both of which Marsh answered clearly and completely. At the back of the room, Captain Carver wrote in her notebook without looking at the screen, not copying slides, writing her own things. She was not looking at the presentation. She was not looking at Harwick. She was writing quickly and continuously, in a handwriting that was small and dense and covered the page in a way that suggested she was writing considerably faster than most people write when they're taking notes. Whatever she was recording all of it, every word, every number. The background noise of the briefing translated through some process in her head into marks on paper that Harwick, from where he sat, could not read. Marsh reached the 3rd compound, a site in the Watapur Valley that Signal's intelligence had flagged 3 days ago. Possible weapons cache, possible facilitation node. The pattern of life data was thin. 2 confirmed military-age males entering between 0200 and 0400 on alternating nights. No women, no children observed. Movement pattern inconsistent with normal agricultural activity for the season. Signal traffic indicating brief burst transmissions on a UHF band consistent with encrypted communications. Possible indication of... "The traffic pattern is wrong," said a voice from the back of the room. Marsh stopped mid-sentence. Everyone turned. Captain Carver had not looked up from her notebook. "The alternating night pattern," she said, still writing. "It's not a weapons rotation schedule. The timing matches a livestock grazing shift change for that valley in autumn. Those are shepherds. The compound is a way station, not a cache site." Silence. The kind of silence that happens when something is said in a room full of people who aren't sure whether to agree or push back, and who need a moment to figure out which reaction is correct. Marsh looked at his slides, then at Harwick, then at his slides again. His expression was the expression of a man who had just had his briefing interrupted by someone he didn't recognize, saying something he couldn't immediately refute. "The signal intercepts suggest," he began, "the signal intercepts are picking up a handheld UHF radio on the 403 MHz band," Carver said. "Standard Shepherd communication in that region for the last 40 years. It's not encrypted. The burst pattern is consistent with battery-powered analog transmission over distance, which causes the intercept system to flag it as intentional encoding when it's actually just terrain-degraded signal. It's not a cache. It's 2 men talking about sheep." She closed her notebook. She looked up. The room was looking at her. 12 people who had all been in various states of polite attention 30 seconds ago were now fully engaged with whatever was happening at the back of the table. If you send a team to that compound, you will spend 6 hours questioning 2 very confused farmers and create a pattern of disruption in a civilian node that will burn your community relationship in that valley for the next 18 months, she said. The valley has been cooperative. I'd recommend keeping it that way. Remove the compound from the target list. Nobody said anything. Harwick looked at Marsh. Marsh looked at his slide. He pulled up the raw intercept data on his laptop, scrolled through it, and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "The 403 frequency is consistent with that." The briefing ended 40 minutes later. People filed out with the particular efficiency of people who have somewhere to be after a scheduled event. Harwick stayed at the front of the room, reviewing his notes, letting his irritation settle into something he could work with. He was not used to being corrected in his own briefing room. He was not used to captains who sat in the back and spoke without being recognized. He was not used to the specific quality of silence that had followed Carver's analysis. The silence of people who weren't sure whether to be impressed or unsettled, and who were leaning toward both simultaneously. The correction had been right. That was the part that bothered him most. Not that she had spoken out of turn, but that she had been right when she did it, that the room had felt it, that Marsh had confirmed it within 45 seconds of her saying it. A competent wrong answer he could have dismissed. A quiet right answer from someone he'd just tried to redirect to the annex room was harder to file. Master Sergeant Ellison lingered near the door until the last analyst left, then came back in. "Sir," he said, "Captain Carver." "I know," Harwick said. "Get me her file." "That's the thing, sir." Ellison paused, and Ellison didn't pause often, which meant this was something. "Her file isn't in the battalion system. It's not in the brigade system either. I ran her name when she came in. I run everyone who shows up without prior notification, sir. And the search returned a restricted access notification. Level 5. Harwick looked up from his notes. Level 5 restriction meant the file existed, but could not be accessed without specific authorization from a flag officer or above. In 12 years of service, Harwick had encountered Level 5 restrictions exactly twice. Both times, the person in question had turned out to be someone whose actual function was several organizational levels above what their uniform suggested. "What do you know about her?" he said. "Almost nothing, sir. She came in on the morning flight from Bagram. She wasn't on the pre-arrival manifest that I received. Her name appeared on the aircraft manifest, but without a unit of assignment or function code. The unit designation in the system is listed as Detachment 7, Special Programs, which is not a unit I have any record of in the MTOE. Harwick had never heard of Detachment 7, Special Programs. He wrote it down. He looked at what he'd written. He thought about the way she had sat in the back of his briefing room and said, "I'm fine here," as if that were the end of the conversation. He thought about the 403 megahertz frequency analysis, which she had delivered without notes, without accessing any system, without doing anything except writing in a notebook while the briefing was happening and apparently absorbing every data point simultaneously. "Pull everything you can find on that unit designation," he said, "and get me a line to Colonel Walsh at Brigade." Captain Lena Carver was walking down the main corridor toward the operations building when Harwick caught up with her. She was moving at the steady pace of someone with a destination, kit bag still on her shoulder, notebook in hand. She didn't look back. She had the particular quality of someone who expects to be followed and doesn't particularly mind, but also isn't going to slow down on that account. "Captain," he said. She stopped, turned, waited with the patient stillness of someone who had done this specific version of this specific conversation before, which Harwick would later understand she had, multiple times, in multiple commands. "I didn't authorize your attendance at that briefing," he said. "No," she agreed. "How did you get access to this FOB? Tier 2 Pattern Analysis Authorization, standing access to all active intelligence briefings within my designated operational boundary. The authorization is on file at Brigade. It predates your command." He didn't know what a Tier 2 Pattern Analysis Authorization was. He didn't know what her operational boundary covered. He was beginning to feel the particular frustration of someone who is being given accurate information he doesn't have enough context to properly evaluate. "Your intervention during the briefing was inappropriate," he said. "Regardless of whether the analysis was correct, the protocol for—" "Major," she said, and he stopped. Not because she had been rude. She hadn't. She had said his rank quietly, as a factual designation, in a tone that was not challenging, but was also not deferential. "If that team goes to that compound, it will be a dry hole. I've been watching that valley for 7 months. I know what the signal pattern means because I've seen the same pattern in 4 other locations in this province over the last 2 years. You can confirm it yourself. Pull the agricultural calendar for the Watapur and cross-reference the movement timing. It will take you about 20 minutes. I'd recommend doing that before you put a team on a vehicle." She looked at him for a moment. The look of someone who has said what needs to be said and is waiting to find out if it was received. "That's all I have," she said. "I'll stay out of your briefings. I apologize for the disruption." She turned and walked away. Harwick watched her go. Something about the conversation had left him with the particular feeling of a man who has confidently entered a room and discovered that it extends in directions he hadn't seen from the door. That evening, Harwick called Colonel Walsh at Brigade. Walsh picked up on the second ring. "What do you know about Captain Lena Carver?" Harwick said. A pause. The kind of pause that is not empty. The kind of pause that contains a decision about how much to say. "What's she doing?" Walsh said. "She walked into my morning intelligence briefing, told me she had standing authorization, corrected my S2's analysis in front of 12 people. She was right." Harwick paused. "I tried to redirect her to the secondary room. She declined." "She would," Walsh said. "What is she?" Walsh was quiet for a moment. "She's the best pattern analyst I've ever worked with," Walsh said finally. "She's been operating in this region for— I'm not going to tell you how long, because the timeline would surprise you in ways that would complicate your relationship with her, which I want you to have. What I'll tell you is this: listen to her. That's the advice I give every commander she gets assigned to. Listen to her." "Walsh," Harwick said, "what's in her file?" Another pause. Longer. "You'll need a clearance elevation to see her file," Walsh said. "Request it through the proper channel. The elevation will be denied, but the denial will come back with an unclassified summary header, which is all I've seen myself. Read the header." The line went quiet for a moment. "That's all I'm going to tell you," Walsh said. "Listen to her, Harwick. Don't make her sit in the back." The line disconnected. Harwick sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he told Ellison to request the clearance elevation. Ellison came back 2 hours later, looking like a man who had opened a door expecting a closet and found a hallway. "Sir," Ellison said, with the particular careful tone he reserved for information he wasn't sure how to deliver. The clearance elevation was denied as Colonel Walsh indicated it would be. The denial returned with the unclassified summary header. He set a single printed page on Harwick's desk. Harwick read it. The header listed Captain Lena Carver's specialization as advanced pattern analysis and direct action planning support. Her deployment history was listed as 14 operational tours in 8 countries over 11 years. Her language qualifications included Dari, Pashto, Arabic, and Russian, all at the professional working proficiency level or above. Her commendations were listed as classified. The quantity was listed as 23. The most recent commendation had a classification marker that Harwick had never seen before. Below it was a note, "See operational context file." The operational context file was also restricted. Harwick read the page twice. He set it down. He was quiet for a long time. 23 commendations, he said finally. "Yes, sir," Ellison said. "She's a captain." "Yes, sir." Harwick picked up the page again and looked at the deployment timeline. 11 years of operational deployment, 14 tours. The page listed the tours by number, but not by location. All locations restricted. "She's been doing this since she was 21, he said. Ellison did the math and said nothing. The following morning, Harwick pulled up the raw SIGINT data for the Watapur compound and ran Carver's analysis himself. He spent 3 hours on it. He pulled the pattern of life records going back 9 months. He cross-referenced the UHF signal timing against regional agricultural calendars, which he located through the Civil Affairs database, specifically the seasonal livestock migration records for the Eastern Kunar. And he mapped the alternating night entry times against the grazing shift schedule. She was right, not approximately right, precisely right. The alternating entry pattern matched the autumn grazing rotation to within 40 minutes. The UHF signal frequency matched the specification of the handheld analog radio sets that had been distributed to livestock cooperative associations in the eastern provinces through an agricultural development program in 2008. The burst pattern she had identified as terrain-degraded analog transmission was, when he checked it against the actual signal characteristics, exactly what she said it was. The compound was a rest station on a shepherd route. Harwick stared at his screen for a while. He sent a message to Marsh cancelling the compound from the target list. He included a note explaining the analysis. He did not explain who had done the analysis. He would address that with Marsh separately. Then he walked across the FOB to the small operations building where Ellison had told him Carver had been since before 0500. The room she was working in was a secondary storage space that had been converted, apparently by Carver herself, into something resembling an analytical workspace. 3 laptops arranged in a triangle, a wall of printed overhead imagery covering what Harwick recognized as the Eastern Kunar province in section tiles, each section annotated in a hand-marking system using symbols he didn't recognize. A portable signal analyzer plugged into a hard drive, a stack of printed reports that reached approximately to Harwick's knee. She was at the laptops when he came in. She looked up. He sat down across from her without being invited. "You were right about the compound," he said. "Yes," she said. "I confirmed it myself. 3 hours of analysis." "It takes about 20 minutes if you know what to look for," she said, not unkindly, as a data point. Walk me through how you identified the signal pattern, he said. From the beginning. She looked at him for a moment, the same quiet assessment that she had applied to every interaction with him since she'd walked into his briefing room. Then she turned one of the laptops toward him and began to explain. She talked for 45 minutes. She laid out the analytical framework in sequence, the baseline signal characteristics for the region, the method for distinguishing intentional encoding from terrain degradation, the agricultural calendar cross-reference methodology, the livestock migration pattern data she had been building for 7 months. She explained without simplifying, without condescension, at the pace of someone who expects their audience to follow. Harwick followed. Not easily, but he followed. When she stopped, he sat with it for a moment. "How long did it take you to develop this methodology?" he said. 7 years to build it, she said. The rest of the time refining it. He looked at her. 32 at the most. 7 years of this work meant she had started building it at 24 or 25. Except the file said 11 years total, which meant she had been doing something for the first 4 years before the methodology was what it now was. He thought about what 4 years of building something wrong must feel like before you understand how to build it right. He thought about 14 operational tours. He thought about 23 commendations that he wasn't cleared to read. "I'd like to discuss your access to this command more formally," he said. "You have standing authorization through brigade. I understand that. I'd like to establish a working relationship that makes better use of what you're doing here than having you sit in a back room by yourself." She looked at him. "I work best independently," she said. "I share findings when I have them. I don't need integration into your command structure." "Understood," he said. "But when you have findings, I'd prefer you bring them to me directly, rather than waiting for a briefing where the timing is wrong." She considered that. "That works," she said. That afternoon, Harwick made the call. He used the contact number Walsh had given him. Not Walsh's line, but a direct number for a coordination cell at Bagram that handled, as Walsh had described it with characteristic vagueness, special program asset support. He gave his name and rank. He said he was requesting additional context on the asset designated as Captain Lena Carver, currently operating in his area. The person who answered asked him to hold. He held for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. He counted. A different voice came on. Female. Flat. Precise. With a Midwestern inflection that suggested somewhere in Indiana or Ohio. "Major Harwick," the voice said. "I can confirm that Captain Carver has standing Tier 2 authorization for your operational area. I can confirm that her pattern analysis assessments are to be treated as primary source intelligence for purposes of target development and mission planning. In the event of conflict between her assessments and those of your organic intelligence personnel, resolution should favor her assessment pending independent verification. She has operational latitude to access any intelligence resource within your command that she determines necessary for her work. Any request she makes for data access should be treated as a standing priority request." Harwick processed this. "Her assessments are to be treated as primary source intelligence," he said. "Correct. She's a captain." "She's a captain," the voice agreed, in a tone that communicated that this was a factual statement about rank and nothing else. "Is there anything else I can provide context on, Major?" He thought about the 23 commendations, the 14 tours, the file that required a 2-star to open, The 45-minute explanation she had given him that had been simultaneously the clearest and most sophisticated analytical briefing he had received in 12 years of service. "No," he said. "Thank you." He put the phone down and sat alone in his office for a while. He thought about the moment he had gestured toward the back row of his briefing room and said, "There are seats in the annex with the secondary feed." He thought about the way she had looked at him when he said it, and then looked back at her notebook and said, "I'm fine here." He thought about 23 commendations. He sat there for quite a while. The next intelligence briefing was 3 days later. Harwick ran it differently. He had spoken to Marsh the day before. He had told Marsh, without full explanation, that Carver was to be treated as a senior intelligence resource and given full access to all briefing materials before the session. Marsh had asked one question, which was whether she had the appropriate clearance. Harwick had told him that her clearance was above both of theirs, which ended the question. When Carver came in, again near the back, again with her notebook, 15 minutes before anyone else arrived, Harwick stood up and moved a chair to the primary table. "Captain Carver," he said, "please." She looked at the chair, then at him. Then she picked up her notebook and sat at the primary table without comment. The briefing ran for an hour and 20 minutes. Carver spoke 4 times. Each time she spoke, it was to add something to the analysis that Marsh had not included. Not corrections exactly, more like the next layer of a picture that Marsh's presentation had outlined without completing. The 4th time she spoke, she directed the entire analytical effort for the Dara-Epech segment toward a target that had not been on anyone's radar before the briefing. She laid out the basis for the target in 3 minutes. She used data that everyone in the room had access to. Nobody had seen it the way she saw it. After the briefing, Harwick found Marsh in the corridor. Marsh looked at him. "She's extraordinary," Marsh said. "I know," Harwick said. "How long has she been doing this?" 11 years, Harwick said. Marsh said nothing for a moment. "I've been doing intelligence work for 9 years, he said. "I've never seen analysis like that." "Neither have I," Harwick said. He walked back to his office. He didn't say anything else about it. There wasn't anything else to say. 6 weeks after Carver arrived at FOB Mercer, the intelligence she had been building in her back room produced a direct action opportunity. The target was a compound in the Peak River Valley. 3 HVTs with confirmed association to a weapons facilitation network that had been active in the region for 14 months. A weapons cache co-located with the primary HVT's residence. Movement schedule, card rotation, egress routes, vehicle tracking, pattern of life data going back 4 months. All of it laid out in a target package that Harwick's S3 described, after reading it twice, as the most complete pre-mission intelligence picture he had seen in 2 years of operations. Harwick read it 3 times. Every element traced back to data that existed in the battalion's intelligence holdings. Nothing Carver had used was unavailable to Marsh or to any other analyst in the S2 section. The information had been there. The picture it formed had not been visible to anyone until she drew it. He called Walsh. "She put together the Pech Valley package," he said. "I know," Walsh said. "She sent me a copy this morning." "She's been building this since before she walked into my briefing room," Harwick said. "She starts working before she arrives," Walsh said. "She reads the available data for an area before she deploys to it. By the time she gets to a command, she's usually already 3 weeks into the analysis." Harwick sat with that. She walked into my briefing room, and I told her to sit in the back, he said. Walsh said nothing. She had already been working this target for weeks, Harwick said. Longer than that, Walsh said. She identified the network structure 4 months ago from Bagram on a secondary tasking. She came to your FOB to build the final layer. Harwick was quiet. She didn't tell me that, he said. She never does, Walsh said. That's part of why it works. She doesn't announce herself. She doesn't establish territory. She goes to where the work is and she does it. The operation ran on a Tuesday night. Carver was in the TOC for the duration. She sat at a secondary terminal with her headset on and her notebook open. She did not speak during the vehicle movement phase or during the infiltration. When the lead team reached the compound's outer perimeter and called back a discrepancy, a vehicle that had not been in the pre-mission intelligence package, she cross-referenced it against the overhead imagery archive in approximately 40 seconds and told the team commander it was a secondary vehicle with 12 weeks of intermittent presence at the location, almost certainly a family member's vehicle. No threat indicator. Recommend treat as civilian. The team commander confirmed. Adjusted approach accordingly. Made entry. 3 apprehensions. Weapons cache confirmed at the projected location. Cache contents within 15% of her projected inventory. No shots fired. No casualties on either side. When the teams returned to the FOB, the TOC had the noise that comes after a successful operation. The relief and adrenaline and the specific satisfaction of things going exactly the way they were planned to go. People talking, handshakes, the S3 already drafting the AAR. Harwick looked across the TOC at Carver. She was writing in her notebook. She had her headset pushed to one side. She was not looking at the team feeds. She was not participating in the post-operation energy of the room. She was writing in her notebook in the small, dense handwriting that covered the page completely, and she was doing it with the focused attention of someone already thinking about the next thing. The operation was finished. She was already past it. The debrief was the following morning. Carver was not at the debrief. Harwick found out when he called for the room, and Ellison told him she had checked out at 0330, boarded the Bagram shuttle, and departed. Her name was on the aircraft manifest, with the same unit designation she had arrived under. No destination beyond Bagram, no notice, no goodbye, no conversation about what she was leaving behind. Harwick stood in the corridor outside the briefing room for a moment with his coffee going cold in his hand. He thought about what she had produced in 6 weeks at his command. The target package, the Watapur compound analysis that had kept a team out of a dry hole. The 4 contributions during the second briefing that had redirected the intelligence effort for 2 valleys. The operation that had run clean because every element of it had been known before it started. She had done all of it in a back room with 3 laptops and a wall of overhead imagery. And she had left before anyone could say anything about it. He went into the briefing room. He ran the debrief. He did not tell anyone that he had spent the morning standing in a corridor, realizing that the most valuable person to pass through his command in 11 days had been the woman he had tried to redirect to the annex room on the first morning she arrived. Some things you keep. The folder was on the secondary terminal when Ellison went to clear the room. It wasn't labeled. It was a stack of 31 printed pages, bound with a binder clip, sitting on the desk beside the terminal as if it had been placed there deliberately, which it had. Ellison brought it to Harwick. Harwick read it over 2 days. It was a complete analytical framework for the Eastern Kunar region. Pattern of life baselines for every significant population center in the operational area. Signal traffic analysis covering 14 months of intercept data, organized into network maps that showed which nodes were connected to which and how the connections had shifted over time. Agricultural and livestock, seasonal calendars, commercial trucking routes, community network maps identifying the key social connectors in 6 villages, historical pattern data cross-referenced with operational outcomes going back 2 years, annotated with lessons about what the pattern changes had indicated before the outcomes happened. The kind of document that takes a full intelligence section 6 months to produce. She had produced it in 6 weeks, on top of the target work, while attending briefings and running the Pech Valley operation support. Marsh read it and sat quietly for a long time. "She built this on top of everything we already had," he said finally. "She used our data we had access to, and she produced something we couldn't have produced with that data." "Because she knows how to see it," Harwick said. "How does someone learn to see it like that?" Harwick thought about 11 years, about 14 tours, about 23 commendations that nobody was clear to read. "By doing it," he said, "for a very long time." Carver arrived at FOB Shindand 6 weeks after leaving FOB Mercer. She came in on a cargo flight with a kit bag and a notebook, and found the operations building by walking toward where most people with purpose seemed to be walking. The commanding officer at Shindand, Lieutenant Colonel Garrett, had been told by Walsh to expect a pattern analyst and to give her what she needed. Garrett had not been told more than that. Walsh operated, in Garrett's experience, on the principle that people who needed context would ask for it, and people who didn't need context would figure it out. Carver walked into his operations building and introduced herself and asked for a room, a terminal, and the last 8 months of signal intercepts for the Western Herat corridor. He gave her all 3. He was a careful man. He had learned to tell the difference between people who should be given what they asked for and people who should be asked what they planned to do with it. Carver fell into the first category, and he knew it within about 90 seconds of her walking through his door, and he filed that away and moved on. She spent 9 days reading. On the 10th day, she sent him a document. The document explained that the logistics and facilitation network that had frustrated the intelligence effort for 14 months was not, in fact, moving its operational nodes in response to surveillance pressure. It was operating on a monthly rotation, synchronized with the regional commercial trucking calendar. The nodes were commercial storage facilities being used on specific nights when normal truck traffic provided natural cover for additional vehicle activity. The translation layer being used to process the Dari language signal intercepts had introduced a 2-day lag in the timestamp data, which meant that every analysis of the network's movement had been looking at where it had been 2 days ago rather than where it was. The network had never moved. The analysis had been chasing the shadow of something that had already happened by the time anyone saw it. Garrett read the document. Then he called Walsh. "She found it," he said. "I know," Walsh said. "In 9 days," Garrett said. "Usually takes her a week to 10 days for a problem that size," Walsh said. "She reads fast." What Carver did was not complicated to describe. It was extremely difficult to do. She read everything, not summaries, not briefing slides, not the digested products of other analysts. Everything. The raw signal intercepts, the pattern of life logs, the source reports, the imagery annotations, the commercial traffic data, the agricultural calendars, the historical pattern archives. She read it in the original language whenever possible, which was more often than most people expected, because she had spent 11 years learning languages the way engineers learn systems, methodically, practically, at the level of how they actually work rather than how they appear to work from outside. She read everything, and then she looked for what the data was saying that nobody had noticed it was saying. Most analytical errors, in her experience, were errors of expectation. The analyst comes to the data looking for something specific, a weapons network, a facilitation node, an HVT pattern, and the data is interpreted through that frame. Things that fit the frame get flagged. Things that don't fit get filed as noise or anomaly. She came to data without a frame. She let the data build the frame. This meant she was often, in the first days at a new command, apparently doing nothing, sitting with data, reading reports that seemed unrelated to the immediate problem, following tangents that nobody else thought were relevant. It looked like inefficiency. It was the opposite. What she was doing in those apparently unstructured early days was building a baseline, understanding what normal looked like. Normal signal traffic, normal movement patterns, normal commercial activity, normal community behavior for that region and that season. Only with a solid baseline could you see what was abnormal. Only with a solid understanding of what sheep herding looked like could you see that a signal pattern was sheep herding and not weapons trafficking. The baseline took time. The pattern recognition, once the baseline existed, was fast. This was the thing she had learned to do that was not transferable by explanation. You could explain the method. You could not give someone 11 years of built baselines across 7 countries in 4 languages. She had tried, in 14 commands, to write down what she knew in a form that other people could use. The 31-page document at FOB Mercer was the most recent attempt. It was the best version she had ever produced. It was still only a shadow of the actual knowledge. The actual knowledge lived in the specific way her brain had been shaped by 11 years of doing the work wrong first and then right and then better. You can't write that down. You can only build it. The question she was asked most often, by people who knew enough to ask it, was some version of, "Why are you still a captain?" She had been a captain for 4 years. The promotion timeline was normal. The reason she had not been promoted to major was a choice she had made at her first promotion board. The choice to submit a declination memo and remain in her current function. Promotion to major meant a staff assignment. A staff assignment meant leaving the operational role she currently occupied and moving into the management layer of the Army, the layer where you run programs and manage personnel and produce reports that other people summarize for generals. The management layer was important. It was also not where the work she did existed. She had made the decision in about 15 minutes and had not revisited it since. What she did required being in the field. It required access to raw data from active operations. It required the freedom to move between commands as the analytical need moved, which was a freedom that majors with staff assignments did not have. The Army's system for managing its people was optimized for a certain kind of officer. The officer who builds a career, who accumulates command experience and staff time and educational milestones in the right sequence to reach increasing levels of seniority. She was not that kind of officer. She was the kind of officer who had learned to do one specific thing at a level that was, as far as she could tell, unusual. She intended to keep doing it for as long as it needed to be done. When it stopped needing to be done, she would find out what came next. The rank was administrative. The work was the point. 2 years after Carver's time at FOB Mercer, Harwick was in the handover process with his replacement, Lieutenant Colonel Rees, who was taking command of the battalion. At some point in the handover, Rees asked about the Pech Valley operation. It had become a reference point in the brigade. The clean operation, the perfect target package, the textbook execution that the S3 school at Fort Bragg had requested a copy of for instructional purposes. "Who built that package?" Rees said. Harwick told him. Rees wrote it down, then stopped and looked at what he'd written. "I know her," he said. "FOB Salerno. 2 years ago. She came in for about 8 weeks, built a pattern package that produced 4 HVT apprehensions, and left before anyone had processed that she was leaving." Harwick looked at him. "When she arrived," Rees said slowly, "I told her to sit in the back," Harwick said. Rees looked at him. "First day," Rees said. "First day," Harwick agreed. The two of them sat with that. "She didn't seem bothered," Rees said. "She never does," Harwick said. "That's the thing. She just does the work. The rest of it," he paused. "She's patient enough to wait for people to figure out what they're looking at." Rees nodded slowly. "How long until you figured it out?" he said. Harwick thought about the Watapur compound, the phone call with Walsh, the 23 commendations, the morning he had stood in the corridor with his coffee going cold. "Long enough," he said. "Too long." 2 years after FOB Mercer, Harwick deployed again. Different theater, different command, different set of problems. 6 weeks in, a woman walked into his briefing room. Plain uniform, no rank visible. Kit bag on one shoulder. A notebook. Different woman. Not Carver, younger. She moved the way Carver moved, with the quiet efficiency of someone who has been in many rooms like this and has never been impressed by any of them. She sat in the back. Harwick looked at her. He looked at Ellison, who gave the specific look that meant he also didn't know who she was and had also run the name and also gotten a restricted access notification. Harwick stood up. "Captain," he said. She looked up. "Why don't you come up here?" He moved a chair to the primary table without making it a production. Just moved the chair. Set it where it needed to be. She looked at him for a moment. Whatever she saw, it satisfied something. She picked up her notebook and came to the front and sat down. She didn't comment on it. She opened her notebook and waited for the briefing to begin. She was right about 4 things during that briefing. Harwick wasn't surprised. He was ready. The lesson that Harwick passed to Rees, that Rees passed to the next commander at Salerno, that the next commander passed to the one after. Not a formal lesson, not a doctrine publication or a training manual. The informal transmission that happens in the corridors of forward operating bases when outgoing commanders brief their replacements on the things that matter. The lesson was simple. Some people will walk into your briefing room and sit in the back. They will not announce what they know. They will not explain their clearance level or their operational history, or the number of commendations on file in a system you're not cleared to access. They will sit in the back and open a notebook and wait for the briefing to begin. Pay attention to those people, not because every person who sits quietly in the back is carrying 23 commendations and 11 years of operational deployment. Most aren't. But because the habit of paying attention, of not assuming that the most important person in the room is the one at the front, is a habit worth having. Because the habit of making room, of moving chairs, of saying "come up here" without needing to know why first, that habit costs nothing. And the cost of not having it can be a 6-hour dry hole in the Watapur Valley, or worse. In the 12th year of her operational career, Carver was assigned to a command in a theatre she had not worked before. New country, new language. She spent the flight reading. New signal environment, new commercial patterns, new agricultural calendar, new community network structure. Everything new. She arrived with a kit bag and a notebook and found the operations building and introduced herself to the commanding officer, who had been told by his predecessor, who had been told by his predecessor, who had been told by Walsh, to give her what she needed and listen when she spoke. She asked for a room, a terminal, and the raw data archive going back 12 months. She got all three within the hour. She spent 8 days reading. On the 9th day, she went to the commanding officer's office and knocked on the door. "I found something," she said. He told her to come in. She sat down and opened her notebook and explained what she had found. It took 22 minutes. The commanding officer listened. He asked 3 questions. She answered all 3 completely. When she finished, he looked at her for a moment. "How long did it take you to learn to see this?" he said. She thought about that. "The first 4 years," she said, "I saw almost nothing correctly. I built the framework for what I do now out of all the things I got wrong in those 4 years." He nodded slowly. "Come to the morning briefing," he said. "Sit wherever you want." She picked up her notebook and went back to her room. She sat where she always sat, near the back, close enough to see everything, far enough to watch the room, where the work was. In the rooms she had occupied over 12 years of this work, the back rows, the secondary terminals, the small storage spaces converted to analytical workspace, she had learned one thing above all others. The room does not know what it contains. The briefing room doesn't know who is sitting in the back of it. The TOC doesn't know what the person at the secondary terminal is building while everyone else is watching the primary feeds. The operations building doesn't know that the woman in the small room at the back has been mapping its problem for 7 months before she walked through the door. The room just exists. The people in it carry what they carry. The rank insignia and the seat position and the speaking order at the primary table. These are signals that the room has agreed to use to communicate something about importance and authority. She had learned that the signals were approximate. She had learned to work in the space between what the signals indicated and what was actually true. She had not learned this because she was patient, though she was. She had not learned it because she was indifferent to recognition, though she was largely indifferent. She had learned it because the work required it, because the work she did was most effective when people underestimated her, when she could sit in the back and absorb what was happening without being asked to perform what she knew before she was ready to show it. The correction, when it came, landed differently than it would have if she had announced herself. It landed as truth, not as authority, not as rank, not as the performance of expertise, just as the thing that was correct, delivered by someone who had been sitting quietly in the back of the room and clearly knew. She closed her notebook. The briefing was starting. She was ready. She was always ready. The room would figure out what it was looking at. It always did.